Hello and welcome to this video, and in this one I'm going to be undertaking my largest 15mm scale project and getting it started for the first time. So to help me out with this one, Phrozen very kindly sent me over the Sonic Mini 8K, so where we could print off some really crisp and detailed little miniatures. So let's kick off this video. So if you've seen any of my other 15mm Wargaming stuff, you pretty much know what I'm going to be doing with this. But I've always wanted to do something a little bit bigger in terms of scale, as in like the size of the actual project. And I wanted to have things like buildings, vehicles, and just everything else as well. Now, originally I was inspired with this idea after watching The Last of Us and seeing the destroyed like apocalyptic city. And I thought, I want something like that for my players to be able to play in. I'd be able to use it for things like Kill Team, I'd be able to use it for things like Warhammer 40k, just any kind of wargaming. But more importantly, I wanted to do some kind of like tactical RPG type game. So I had that in mind when starting to do this. The aim of this part of the project is just to test out some minis to use with it, get some scales and everything so that way I know what's going to work for me, and just get some ideas of different buildings that I'll be able to use and then expand from there. So the first step was trawling the internet to get different files, and I found all sorts of different things like different buildings. I found a nice little road set that I'm going to be able to use. There's some incredible little miniatures as well that we'll get into as well as we go through the video. And to help everybody out, I've got all of these linked in the description below. That'll take you to a page on my website, and that'll have links to all of the different files where you can get them from. You can subscribe to different patrons or buy the files yourself. Some of them are free as well. But I will also have all the scales that I've used as well, so how much you need to scale it down by in your slicer. Because I always forget, and you guys always ask me in the comments, and I have no idea what I actually put them down to. So kicking off the project, the first thing I did was grab these files from Station Forge. Now they make some really incredible like Warhammer 40k type proxies, but they're different enough that they're really interesting. So I grabbed this set of Grimsguard, and they look really cool. And I actually recently printed these off in full scale. I was really tempted to do this project as full scale, but by doing that, I'd have far fewer buildings and I wouldn't be able to get the full scale of like a full-blown apocalyptic city, which is what I will eventually be getting to. So I grabbed these and I threw them into my slicer. And the first thing that you want to do, and this is a tip, not just for small scale printing when you're slicing things and kind of scaling it down, but just for anyone in general. Scale can be a bit of a nightmare when you're going between different creators. You don't know what their scale is going to look like. So what you want to do is have one mini that is your reference mini that you always go back to. So in this case, I have this Grimsguardman, and basically I've got him always on hand that I can throw into my slicer and put him next to other files. So in this case, for example, I scaled him down to 53%. I can then compare him to other models that I'm going to be putting in and see, are they going to be too big? Are they going to be too small? And then things like terrain, for example, I can throw that in there and put him next to a building. And is that building too big? Is it too small? And it just saves a lot of time in terms of like printing something off and looking at it and going, well, that doesn't fit with the rest of my models. So having that reference mini, especially if you are scaling it down to like your 15mm stuff, it's really handy. But just in general, having a reference mini is just a really good tip that you should probably take away. So having him to hand made it really handy, getting things printed off, and then I just started running through a whole load of things. So all of the little tiny miniatures, like all of your soldiers and everything else, they were all printed on the Phrozen Sonic Mini 8K. And the reason why this was such an attractive thing when they offered to send it over to me to do this project was the fact that you get incredible detail on this, because obviously it's an 8K printer without having it spread out. Now, I historically have used the Saturn 8K, but obviously the difference with that is it's a much bigger, larger build plate, so your pixels are all spread out, whereas on the Phrozen, it's a smaller build plate, which means it's more condensed, so you can get better quality. And I've got to say, I have no complaints at all with the quality that printed off. It did an incredible job, and hopefully you can see that on all these different things. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that the Sonic 8K Mini has this laser-etched build plate. The first great thing about this is with these tiny little minis, they basically stick to the build plate and not the FEP. They are well and truly bolted on there because of this laser etching on it, which is really good. However, if like me, you're moving across from a machine that doesn't have that like laser etched build plate, one thing to consider is that you'll really need to lower the amount of base layers that you're using, or those burn-in layers that you use. I'd gone in there with my pretty much usual settings for my Elegoo Mars, my Elegoo Saturn, and I always did quite a lot of base layers on that because they had a tendency sometimes to fall off the build plate if I didn't put a lot on there. So I basically halved the amount of base layers that I've been using, and they came off buttery smooth, but they stuck very nicely during the print process. So different files that I've been using, I've used, like I said, Station Forge to get these sort of like Grimsguardsmen. They look really cool. I also recently subscribed to Gamuk, who is doing this like Space Marine proxy army at the moment. We have this like big dreadnought beastie, and he looks absolutely awesome once I printed him off. One-page rules, I grabbed some of the like plague demon stuff as well, because that's all going to go in there, so they've got enemies to fight with. And yeah, that was just so much fun getting all of those printed. I also got these snipers, and they're from Station Forge as well. They look like they're definitely going to fit into this kind of like post-apocalyptic world and stuff. They look like stalkers that would just be off exploring and guarding. Yeah, I really like those. In terms of the terrain, I did the same as well, so I threw them into the slicer, and the good thing is that you can take that reference model and throw it into Cura as well. So that way, if you're printing things off like these buildings and these skyscrapers that I was doing, you've then got the little reference minis so you can decide, is it too big, is it too small? Threw them into Cura, obviously did my size comparison, and then I printed them off on the Neptune 3, so they came out really decent. Moving forward, I will probably print off things like points of reference, so like the more detailed buildings and places that I want my players to go to. They'll be printed off on a resin 3D printer, but just to save some time and get the more background stuff, I wanted to go for my FDM printer. Also, things like the roads, they're going to be kind of thrown about, they're going to be used quite a lot. Just makes sense to have them printed off in FDM rather than in resin, because otherwise they're probably going to end up getting broken. Going through all of this, I decided I'm probably going to need some vehicles as well, so I started to bite off maybe more than I should have chewed for this video, but yeah, what the hell, it's a lot of fun. So I grabbed some of the files that I have from KFMP, which do these like 6mm or like 8mm stuff that you can get, and it already comes in that size, and I scaled these up, and I think it was 200%, but check the link just to double check it. Got all these tanks, and I got a few of those printed off, and then I was ready to move on to the actual painting stage of it. So if you're not too sure how to go through the printing process for this, basically all you do, load up your slicer. So for the Phrozen, for some reason I've ended up using Lychee rather than Chitubox. I don't know how I actually ended up there, but either way, you can use either of these slicers to get this done. Take your models, and you want to be going for unsupported models for this, because if you use supported models, scaling them past anything like 80% apparently just makes them go absolutely crazy, the supports become too thin, and you're most likely going to get some failures. So go for the unsupported files if you can do. Ideally, you want to have combined files as well, because if you print them off like I did with the Grimsguardsman, they come off with like little tiny arms and little tiny bodies, and it's really fiddly to try and get them together. So if you can have a combined model, makes a hell of a lot more sense. Throw them into your slicer, then hit the scaling option. For these, I just went for 53%, but obviously you can choose whatever scale you want to go for. Once you've got them scaled, I rotate them so they're just slightly leaning back, and then I go for the auto supports and throw them on there. For these ones, I used medium supports, and I would have probably preferred to go for light supports because getting them off there was a little bit more tricky. So have a play around and see what ones work for you. For the bases, I did exactly the same. The vast majority of bases I've printed also scale down really nicely, so that way they fit with the models and you don't have to worry about trying to get them onto something. Once you've done that, obviously throw them onto your USB, stick them into your printer, hit print, and then let the thing do its weird resiny UV magic, and you'll get some nice tiny little prints. Originally for this video, I was going to leave it there and then make this like a part 2 bit, but I decided I would just go crazy. So I grabbed my airbrush and I primed everything in black. With the buildings, I then went back in there with a grey through the airbrush and pretty much just left it there. I did do a little bit of dry brushing on the buildings as well, just to kind of bring out some of those details. And I'll probably go back in the future as well and do things like some of the windows just to make them look like they're maybe lit up or something else like that. So there could potentially be a survivor in there. For all of the minis, I used a Zenithal Prime, so I primed them black first with a white over the top. And then I went back in there with my Army Painter speed paints and a few Citadel contrast paints, and just mixed them all up and went wild with these. Now, the great thing about having these 50mm scale models is not just that you can get more off and have a much larger scale, sort of like battle or something like that. They're quite easy to paint. They can look daunting because they're so tiny. You know, they really are tiny, and it can be quite hard to get in to do the details, but you don't need to go mad. If you use something like speed paints or contrast paints, they become much easier to paint than using like your traditional paints, because you kind of just slap them all over. And a general rule of thumb that I go with these is I'll normally just go for like a 3-color rule for these. If you go for anything more, it can get really tricky, it can start to look pretty messy, but go for like your main block color that's going to be pretty much all over them. So like on these snipers, for example, I think it was Gargruk Sewer, pop that all over it, and then you can just choose out a couple of additional things. On the Grimsguards, I used like obviously their flesh tones, and then it was just a black pretty much all over, and if I want to go back in there, I can add some more detail. On the Space Marine type things, I did blue all over. I then did a little bit of black for things like the weapons, and then just touched them up with some gold on there as well, because obviously they're like Ultramarines and they love their blue and gold. So that was pretty much on there. Just let me pick out some details. You do not need to go crazy with these. It's pretty easy just to kind of do a little bit, throw a wash over there, and in this case, I did an oil wash, slap it on there, and you're pretty much done at that stage. With the Dreadnought on the tanks, I airbrushed them all blue first, and then with the Dreadnought, I wanted them to have these like glowy weapons, like they were so hot and everything. So I hit him with red on the weapons and had this like red glow on him. I kind of then lost that a little bit later on when I dry brushed it, but I think it turned out pretty well. And once that was done, I grabbed the final little bits that are these like little trees that I've got, and also like these ruined bits and barrels that I printed off on the Phrozen printer. And then I did a really quick prime on those and just a very basic paint job. Once they were all painted up, I took them outside, put a black background in there, and decided I would show them off for you guys to have a look at. And here they are in all their glory. Now, whilst I show off some of these glamour shots, let me explain what I'd like to do. Obviously, I would like to do some things like little mini kill teams and some epic scale battles and everything else as well. But my overall idea is I'd really like to put together some kind of RPG type game where I can take some players, I'd be the game master, and they're going into the city and they've got to explore different points of interest. I'd have different cards, for example, so I'll draw a card from the top of the deck if they explore that skyscraper, and it'll tell them what event then happens. Maybe they meet an NPC, maybe they meet a horde of different zombies, and just really mix it up. They'd all have different characters, so I'll combine things like Dungeons and Dragons type stuff with this. In my head, it makes sense, but I need to make that work at the moment. So that's what I'm going towards. And this is just the first part of this series where I will be printing off all sorts of different things to go into this. So let me know in the comments, what do you want to see next? Do you want to see more detailed points of interest? Do you want to see different types of armies? Would you like to see something like a Titan that's going in there? So maybe some massive epic mecha robots that are having a big battle whilst all like the different soldiers are fighting it out. The basic things like additional roads, different buildings that are going in the background, that's all going to be happening regardless of what you guys want. So let me know what additional stuff you'd like me to focus on going forward, because this is going to be a hell of a lot of fun. I've made that first step. Going to be doing some more as well. So I hope you've enjoyed that video, and if you have, hit the like and subscribe button to come along for some more content in the future. Like I said, I will be delving deeper into this now. I've started it. There's no way I'm going to stop. So let's see what happens next. And just once again, I want to say thank you to Phrozen for sending over the Sonic Mini 8K. I think you can all pretty much agree that even at this tiny little scale, it came out incredibly well. That thing does a damned good job in terms of detail. In the meantime, stay safe. I'll see you all soon. Bye.